YouTube? What the crap's going on? Heir of Carthage here, back with Heir's faction focus, and this time we're going to be looking at Epirus. So Epirus got an update recently, and you went, Heir, wait a minute, that's not alphabetical order. You said alphabetical order, and Carthage is next. Yeah, I know, trust me, I'm excited to do Carthage. Obviously, I have a slight bias towards them, if you can't tell from the name of my channel. But I have read in an article, I guess some... anyway, thanks to the people who linked it in my comments. There's an article from, I think it was Eurogamer, where they had been talking to Total War about some of the backlash over the launch of Rome 2 and some of the DLCs, and in it was basically mentioned that Carthage was one of the factions that we should expect a unit update. Well, I don't know when that unit update's coming. Maybe they're planning for like 5 months from now. I don't have any idea. But I wanted to wait on Carthage just in case a unit update dropped for them, and it could drop for any of these factions that I've done so far, and if it does, I'll go back and recover them. But in any case, we're going to look at Epirus for now, and Epirus recently got one of these updates, and a couple of important changes took place, which I pointed out in a previous video, so let me cover Epirus as I see them in current gameplay. I think that they're a fun faction, and they actually have some certain strengths that I find to be very interesting. They don't really have much to offer in terms of melee infantry, but these Illyrian levies can be useful in certain scenarios, as well as Royal Peltists have their place on the battlefield if you can find it for them. They are one of the strongest sword units in the game, pretty close to Praetorian Guard in terms of stats, but Praetorian Guard are stronger. So these guys only have 50 health. I wonder how that does compare to a Praetorian Guard. Yeah, Praetorian Guard's got 55, so pretty close. 75 armor, 55 health, 70 base morale. Yeah, I mean, so just a little more armor and health for Praetorian Guard, but similar stats when it comes to attack. So in any case, they're definitely a strong sword unit with the Encourage ability. As far as spears go, it doesn't look like they have a lot, but I actually think they have some interesting ones. So if you take a look at a couple of these. One, Militia Hoplites, for the cost, you get a heck of a lot of armor, melee defense, and shield strength. For this cost. Let me show you what I mean. So if you hover over melee defense, it shows you the shield value, which is 25, which is about as good as shield value comes. So what are these guys good for? They're actually semi-missile resistant and cheap, and since they're a hoplite unit with the strong, I wouldn't say these guys have strong armor, but they have sturdy armor, which means that they can resist a charge. They're not going to kill anything that charges them, but they'll resist it and hold it. Which makes them good for a couple of things. One, they can be used well as a screening unit, meaning to rush them forward because they have the ability to intercept a charge, while a lesser unit, say like a Illyrian levy, which is more dangerous in the flank of an enemy, could follow behind and then peel off into the type of engagement where it would do better. And in fact, let me look at this Illyrian levy real quick before we move on. If you all look at the weapon damage, it's actually half and half armor piercing, so these guys have a pretty low attack, but the damage they do is going to be pretty brutal because it's mostly armor piercing. In any case, they have also mercenary Italian spearmen. I honestly don't see the point in these guys because the militia hoplites are better and for slightly less cost. So yeah, I wouldn't use these guys, but maybe someone's found use for them. Thurio spears are interesting because they're a little cheaper than hoplites, but essentially offer the same thing with a little less attack. And hoplites, of course, are best because of their armor and health. You can see that armor and health is actually right on par with a Royal Peltist, but for a whole lot less cost. Again, these guys aren't going to kill a lot of people when they get charged. Like, so for instance, if a cav unit charges hoplites, don't expect that cav unit to die. It won't. But your hoplites will stop it. And they can sometimes slow down an elephant charge. Almost never can stop a chariot charge. But, you know, just to kind of give you an idea, they can stop infantry charges and cav charges, to be certain. As far as pike infantry, the Epirus has a nice variety. They've got everything from levy pikes to regular pikes to Hellenic Royal Guard. If you can ever get these guys into a fight, Hellenic Royal Guard will beast pretty much anything on the game with no problem. But again, very expensive and very risky because these guys are somewhat vulnerable to missiles. They do have 80 armor, which is substantial, but what's going to hurt them is their shield strength, which if you look right here is only 15, as opposed to say like this cheaper hoplite when you look at the shield strength, which is 25. So it's their shield being able to block projectiles that makes these guys vulnerable. So you got to be careful, and it's the same story with foot companions with Macedon. Okay, so let's take a look at their missile infantry. They've got a nice variety all the way from these cheap javelinmen, which are kind of like the Epirot equivalent of Roman levies or leves, whatever you want to call those guys. These guys do have their place on the battlefield in the fact that you can bring huge swarms of them for almost no cost, but they are weak, and they're going to die to almost anything. But even cheap javelins like these can be an effective counter to elephants, and if you can get enough shots with them, potentially chariots. Another thing I like is that they have access to these cheap archers. Archers are crap, don't get me wrong, but for only 250 talents and the ability to have 125 range anti-elephant unit, it could be considered. I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it could be considered. Cheap slingers are really not good for much, in my opinion. I don't see a whole lot of use for these guys whatsoever. They won't be good against other slingers. No one's usually dumb enough to field an army of archers, so they don't have a whole lot of purpose. Peltist, here's the number one thing going for Peltist in any faction that has this unit that looks like this. If you look, this is kind of something to be aware of in the game. It has 55 armor, which puts it on like the same level as a hoplite, almost. Very high armor, and if you look at their melee defense, the same shield, actually higher shield value than a hoplite. So that's insane. These guys have the biggest chance in the game of blocking a projectile, which makes them very effective at getting at someone's heavy infantry even while they're under fire from enemy slingers or archers. So I kind of like the fact that these guys are kind of a counter to long-range skirmish units and the fact that you can close the gap and skirmish. I don't like exactly how quickly they can kill infantry units. I wish that kill rate would be slowed down, and I think it would make a more interesting balance. What I'd like to see eventually, hopefully, is that these guys are kind of anti-long range skirmishers in the sense that they can travel through the barrage of fire to get closer to try and take them down, thus allowing someone to be able to rush if they're being screened by these guys. Whereas I'd like to see archers really be the ones that do the heavy damage against heavier and armored units, unlike Peltist. That would make a reason for people to bring archers, and then I think it would create a more interesting balance in the game. I'm not saying I want these guys to be nerfed to the point of uselessness. Again, it'd be nice to see them serve a slightly different purpose rather than basically being matchlock units. In any case, Agriani and Axemen are an interesting unit. If you expect that your skirmishers might end up being thrown into the flank of an enemy, it could be good to bring them, but if you look, their armor value is much lower than the Peltist, so it's something to be aware of. So if they get in a fight with other Peltist, these guys are kind of vulnerable because they don't carry much armor, and they're bound to take hits. They do have the same shield value, though, but their armor's lower. But if you look at their melee attack, it's substantially better. And if you look at their weapon damage, it's actually, half and half armor piercing. So these guys are similar to the Illyrian levies in some respects, except that they have javelins and they cost twice as much. And they're going to run in loose formation too. So anyway, they've got access to Cretan archers and Rhodian slingers, both of which are quite powerful in their own respect if you can find the right scenario to use them. Cretan archers can be devastating against factions like barbarians that don't have good slingers, because their high attack and their heavy shot will just brutalize barbarian units. And then these Rhodian slingers are able to go toe-to-toe with any skirmish unit in the game, no problem. But they're also expensive. As far as cav goes, Epirus has the unique offering of heavy shot cav along with light shot cav, both of which can be quite cost-effective if used properly. So Thessalian cav is really quite good as a light shot cav unit. They can deliver a devastating rear charge, but they can also counter more expensive heavy melee cav units. So it makes them quite useful in the sense that for their cost, you get a lot of anti-cav function. The other thing these guys are good at is these guys are good at intercepting chariots because they have that bonus versus large. So this is actually the kind of unit you would want to get into a chariot before it gets into your infantry. So for instance, if you were bringing Rome, you'd probably want to bring Sacia Equites to Sacia Equites Extraordinari, which is the shot cav, to keep a player who could potentially bring in chariots from getting into your infantry with them. You'd want to keep that unit close to your infantry. And then they have this heavier Hellenic Royal Cav, which is just a stronger version of, basically the Thessalian Cav, more similar to what you'd see in a companion Cav. Melee Cav, they have a decent offering. They've got Citizen Cav, Mercenary Italian Cav, which, trying to see what the difference is here. The Mercenary Italian Cav has more defense but less armor. So not sure how that plays out. Let's look at defense. They've got good shield value, actually. Don't know how that plays out a whole lot, but let's see. I don't know, better shield value, I guess. It depends on whether or not you expect them to come under skirmish fire. And then they have Aspis Companion Cav, which, don't get me wrong, these guys are brutally powerful, but at their cost, it's hard to get them into enemy sword units to make them effective. But I mean, these guys can take down an Evocati cohort basically straight on, even if it's bracing. I'm not recommending the use of these guys because it's difficult, but if you do get them into the right scenario, they are very powerful. So something to be aware of. As far as skirmish cav, all they have is horse skirmishers and Tarentine cav, which, you know, I don't find to be hugely valuable, but sometimes have their place. They do have Indian war elephants as of the recent update, and they also have this Molossian dog unit, which is the highest attack war dog unit in the game, but they're also the most expensive. These guys can be used to chase down enemy horse skirmishers, which can be quite useful. If they're thrown into the flank of an enemy infantry unit, they'll be quite powerful. If they go head-on with heavy infantry or pike infantry, they will get slain, so something to be aware of there. That's pretty much it for their units. So what type of scenarios do I see Epirus being a useful faction in? Well, I see them being the most useful in the sense that they can be used in kind of the newer metagame style play, which is that they can be used with cheap infantry, kind of like I have here. I'm not using an exact metagame build here, but I've got cheap infantry to hold back from my good skirmishers that are backed up by elephants and cav. That's kind of the metagame that you see in Rome 2 most of the time nowadays. It doesn't mean it's unbeatable, but that's just kind of what you see. So that's the way that I think Epirus is most useful. Again, I always do these demonstrations against the AI just because I want to... Really, the point of this isn't to show you like how decisive they can be or whatever. This is just to show you some of their units in action. It's not to prove anything on my part. So I picked the AI and the map and everything just so I can hopefully bring you all kind of a nice... basically a nice visual of the units that I've just been speaking about rather than just staring at a unit selection screen. Some of you want me to use these guys in online battles. I do. So if you want to see me using these factions, I've used every faction with the exception of the Nomad faction in online battles, and that is available on my channel. So if you want to see them in use in battle, go check out that playlist, the Total War Rome 2 online battles, and you can see me using them against human opponents and see what the outcome is. And like I said, in this case, this is just more of a demonstration purpose. So I brought you know, a fairly heavy infantry Roman build, but also backed up with a fair number of Saki Equites Extraordinari and a unit of elephants too, which is not uncommon for Roman players to be bringing elephants. It's just the AI controls its units quite weird. So I'm going to use my my Rhodian slingers to get some initial shots on the enemy Velites. It's not going to be wildly damaging, but Rhodian slingers are pretty tough. They can get some good kills. And then I'm going to fall back. I don't want my Rhodian slingers to stand there toe-to-toe with these guys. It'd be a waste. I'm going to start firing my... right here you can see the enemy cav charges straight into a militia hoplite. Even though it's a cheap unit, it totally stops that cav charge. And then here I'm going to focus fire my Cretans onto these elephants. And Cretan archers can fairly quickly kill an elephant unit, especially an unarmored one like this Roman elephant. So look at that. One good volley from 3 Cretan archers and those guys are toast. It'd take a little longer for the armored units since arrows have less armor piercing value than javelins, but they can be effective even against armored elephants, so it's just something to be aware of. And now I'm going to start focusing my Cretan archers on heavy shot into enemy Velite units, and the heavy shot will help me penetrate their shield and get the kills I need. Look at the AI, take an Extraordinary right into the front of these guys. Look, here's a screening unit, so look, I screen with this hoplite to get my Illyrian levies in here, into this Roman unit. So I'm going to get them into the side of that legionary cohort, and then I can continue to chase off skirmishers. Elephants are, of course, best used against infantry that's unprotected, and right here that Roman infantry was unprotected. And here's some more Roman infantry that I'm going to sandwich between shot cav and elephants, while my own Hellenic cav pulls them out of position. Now check it out here. Shot cav may not be all that fantastic versus infantry, not head-on at least, but they can still deliver devastating rear blows. Let's watch this legionary cohort. And they just took a brutal charge in the back. Yeah, both those units just lost some men. Yeah, 37 kills on that Thessalian cav already. And again, look at the Cretan archers. An interesting unit. If you can ever get them within range of enemy peltist and stuff, they're pretty damaging. And Rhodian slingers are also damaging, so you can mop up javelin units with them if you can keep them safe from the javelin units' range, because they have that heavy shot. But again, that means you have to be able to keep them safe, and they are quite expensive. But then again, high armor peltists are expensive too. But yeah, you can see all the skirmish fire I'm pouring into the flank of this Roman cohort. It is on their shield side, so they'll have some protection. Check out that again, another heavy cav charge. Hellenic Royal cav in the back just absolutely flattens the Romans. And here I'll do it again. I'm going to use shot cav to slow down enemy infantry from getting away elsewhere into the fight. You can see into the front, though, not nearly so devastating, but into the rear of an enemy unit, shot cav is absolutely devastating. And and then I can just use these pikes to pin down the rest of that Roman infantry and kind of surround them from all directions. In any case, hope you all enjoyed kind of seeing some of the Epirot troops in action. The fact that these guys have Indian war elephants now does make them seriously dangerous as a faction. They're not the strongest faction out there still, just because of their lack of decent sword infantry, but they're definitely a very viable faction. They also don't have very strong melee cav, so you have factions like Bactria and Seleucids and a few others that are going to be better because they have a nice combination of shot cav and good melee cav and Indian elephants. But it definitely makes Epirus much more of a contender after that update. So as far as factions that I would recommend Epirus to be used against, they're going to be good against any barbarian faction, in my opinion. And they should also be good at pike boxing out nomadic factions, especially since you can still have access to cheap cav and your own elephants. Elephants help tank down nomads, plus their wide variety of skirmishers helps them be good against nomads. They would do well against Sparta. There's not much Sparta could do to stop them, which pretty much everybody does well against Sparta. Let's see, I'm trying to think who else they would be pretty usable against. They would be a fun match against Pontus. Both factions offer something interesting. Yeah, so it'd be an interesting... There's interesting matchups. Could you beat Bactria, Egypt, or Seleucids head-on with Epirus? Sure, if you control it right. But I think the lack of armored elephants is going to hurt you there. Plus, the Seleucids and others have access to chariots, which I wouldn't necessarily choose to use against a pike faction, but just, again, something to be aware of. That's kind of my recommendations around them. I think they're going to do better on open field maps. Probably less well in heavily forested maps, but that's just my opinion. You all can add your own opinion down in the comments. Hope you enjoyed it. HeirofCarthage signing off for now.